Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast. My name is Paul LaFavor. I'm here with my ranger buddy, Mike Blackburn, and it is January 3rd, Friday of 2025.
No, that's the second still, isn't it?
Is it second?
I believe so.
I think it's the third. See, we get into this new year.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure.
And was trying to figure out what day is what. But this is our 114th episode. I want to just start off by thanking everyone for listening to us, all our nonsense for the last 113, and hopefully you'll stick around for this one. We got a great episode. We're bringing in NC Scout. We're going to have him, I'm going to throw him a few softballs, and then we're going to go out and smoke some cigars as he just prognosticates on everything that's going to happen for this year.
Prognosticates and pontificates.
Yeah, my friend, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank y'all for having me. It's great to be back in here in a brand new year.
Well, it's really I'm kind of glad that we brought you in as early as we did. We may have waited a bit, but obviously we had some excitement go on January 1st.
Oh boy.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm trying to keep up with the news and all the people's input on what they think this thing may be. So yeah, I mean, I really am interested in kind of hearing from what your thoughts on these characters, right? New Orleans, assailant and the one in Las Vegas. And what your sources are telling you, and then of course what do we have maybe in store for us up until now in the inauguration, and of course post inauguration.
Yeah, go ahead and if you would just set the stage for us.
So, man, it has been a wild 24 hours, 36 hours. In terms of SIGACs. First, I want to say up front that there's a lot of people out there that are looking for conspiracy, and kind of like they immediately jump to, the wild-eyed end of things. I don't think, I'm going to say this up front, I don't think that the New Orleans incident and the Las Vegas incident are related. I think that they're mutually exclusive from one another, related only in the fact that they happened, within the same time frame. I don't think that they're related to one another. There literally are no proxemics between, and proxemics. Incident A, Incident B, perpetrator A, perpetrator B. There are no proxemics between these two other than they served, at Fort Bragg at the same time. I mean, that's like saying, somebody was in Fayetteville at the same time as another guy. Like, I mean, come on. That's really grasping at straws.
Yeah, it's the country's largest military installation. If you're in the military, at least in the Army, at some time or another, you may pass through Fort Bragg. I mean, because it's just got,
as the saying goes,
it's just got so much training venues and units here. So that's not that unusual that both would have seen some time at Fort Bragg.
Yeah, I mean that a lot of people were jumping on that this morning. I thought that was pretty comical. In something that's as deadly serious as this is, the incident in New Orleans, I think was planned out. We know that FBI's HRT from Quantico, not one of their field offices, but the big boys from Quantico were flying out. That means that there was a bigger thing that was at work there. I think that there's probably something that's still in play. They postponed the Sugar Bowl. The governor of Louisiana declared a state of emergency. There's some stuff that obviously we're not privy to, not going to be privy to, but there's a bigger cell that's at work here. This guy, Jabbar, he was living in a commune it's outside of Houston that is an Islamic commune. He got his real estate license. It's my suspicion that he got his real estate license to acquire this property at a cut rate. This is kind of real common in that community for them to do this. And we know that they have ties to Pakistan, because when the New York Post, of all media companies, the New York Post went there and got to this place before the FBI did, which I think is significant and not a good look for the FBI. But they got there before the FBI did, start interviewing people, and everybody speaks Urdu. So that's telling me right there, these characters have ties to Pakistan. And we know for a couple of decades now that some of the more radical elements of Islam at work here in the United States have had ties to a Muslim cleric by the name of Sheikh Gilani. And there's actually several really well done documentaries on this that explains this phenomena and why he's very important to a certain very militant sect of Islam, of Wahhabi Islam. And he's had ties to a lot of jihadists out there, the killers of Daniel Pearl. So, back in the early days of the jihad, I think that was 2004, 2005 timeframe, that Daniel Pearl was abducted and killed. His killer and the cell of jihadis that abducted him had ties to Sheikh Gilani. So I think that the New Orleans incident was an unfortunate case of a targeted attack, something that was bound to happen. Why New Orleans instead of Houston? New Orleans is a bigger target. New Orleans is a bigger target. There was probably a lot of reconnaissance that went on prior to the incident. There's a much larger cell that was at work. We know that Islam, militant Islam, is getting fired back up. I mean, they didn't go away. Certainly went to sleep for a little while, but they have an objective in this country to commit violence, to commit acts of jihad that didn't go away. It didn't magically go away. And just because it coincides with other things that are happening that are unfortunate doesn't mean that the two are aligned. Shifting gears a little bit, shifting focus over to Las Vegas. Obviously, everybody and their brother now knows that we had the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas, a cyber truck parked in front of it and detonated. That's pretty symbolic. We know that the militant left is very, very upset with Donald Trump. He's been a perennial target, but now Elon Musk as well. And you have to understand that in both of these incidents, symbology is very, very important. We look for symbolism. So in New Orleans, there was the black Shahada flag. Some people call it the ISIS flag. Technically, that is the Shahada, it's Islamic proclamation of faith, with a black flag in the background symbolizing sacrifice or symbolizing martyrdom. Well, this guy in Las Vegas, unfortunately is turning out, as more details are coming out, that he was active duty in 10th Group. He was selected for Master Sergeant. He's going to be a team sergeant. He was being slotted into that role. Prior to that, he was an 18 Echo, and then which is a SF communications sergeant, as y'all know, and then an SF intelligence sergeant. And he's done some stuff on the civilian side too. But that in and of itself, I think, is really important to note for the general public, that we kind of all have this image of the military in general, but especially special operations being this kind of consolidated, homogenous, conservative type of leaning organization. And I would say that, to a certain degree, that's true, but you definitely have people who have alternative political views out there as well. I explained this on Radio Contra earlier today, that I worked with a handful of people that were very, very liberal and on the left side of things, and maybe not militantly so, but definitely weren't conservatives. And we just didn't have those conversations. It was fine, whatever, keep things professional and, inside your team. But, you definitely knew where their thoughts were. And they were few and far in between, but they were definitely there. If you take the Ukraine situation, and definitely some of what we've seen inside of the inner workings of government with Ukraine, there's a lot of animosity towards the more conservative elements of government and of our populace. And so we've seen with this guy who is alleged to have done it, that he definitely had some of those leanings. He was recruiting people who were leaving the military, who had retired or ETS, and getting them lined up with gigs in Ukraine, which is not unusual. None of this stuff is unusual, and it's certainly not surprising, but it is important to note. So we have a Cybertruck, which is a very visible symbol of Elon Musk. Right. We have the Trump Tower or Trump Hotel rather, in Las Vegas. Yep. And we have a detonation. There's some inconsistencies there, as a lot of people have pointed out, and kind of my thoughts at first in this, wouldn't a 18 series guy be able to build something a little more effective than that? And at face value, you would think, yeah, if that was the intention. And I don't think, at least looking at kind of at the macro level, I really don't think that this guy intended to self-immolate and to die in this attack. Now, some outlets, I just got off the range. I was, I'm doing a little product development with some optics. And I got off the range, checked the news feed, and it's being reported now. I haven't seen confirmation on this, but it's being reported by the Las Vegas authorities that he had a gunshot wound to the head as they had recovered this guy's body. Yeah, I heard that. That's highly interesting too. But something definitely doesn't smell right with this. So I think Las Vegas being, a case of jihad syndrome, being mutually exclusive from Las Vegas is something much darker. And that one is the one that actually concerns me a heck of a lot more.
Yeah, I'm with you. I find, I hate to say this, I find New Orleans to be rather boring. Because it's just the same old story. It's a story we've seen before so many times. Whereas Las Vegas is very interesting to me. Las Vegas I agree with you with the symbolism. I don't think he didn't pick an exoskeleton vehicle because it was going to enhance the damage of the explosion. Okay, he was going to enhance his V-bid. I think you're absolutely correct. I think that truck was there because it is a symbol of Elon Musk, and he was parked in front of Trump Tower, and he's from what's being reported, very pro-Ukraine. I think you can put those three things together, and I've also seen stories, maybe you have too, as far as like his relationships and especially with his ex-wife. She was supposedly a very militant leftist. birds of the same feather flock together. I think that's a very interesting, to me, that's the interesting story because it's unusual. And you are right in as far as like the community and the fact that the military, I think leans right. I mean, I think pretty much everyone knows that. But that does not mean that there are not hardcore leftists within the military. And I think there has been a concerted effort, especially over the last couple of decades, I would say, to actually recruit leftists and left leaning folks into the military. So I don't think it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, back even when I served with some people that were extremely left. Now, when it came to doing our job, we were apolitical.
Right.
It was just mission first, and no one cared about the politics. But it was fun to discuss it over a beer later. But I do think this I agree with you. I think this story in Vegas is very interesting. Now, so what's next?
Well, unfortunately, we're in the insurgency pyramid. So the Soro resistance pyramid, kind of the road to war, the insurgency. We're very much on that. There's a lot of people in the American government who are diametrically opposed to the presidency of Donald Trump. They see him as illegitimate. They see him as not being worthy to hold office. He's not from here. He didn't come up in the system, and they're opposed to him. And we also have a system of people now that are tasked with securing the nation who have fundamentally turned a blind eye to not just the militant left, but also to Islam. And they've turned around and they've focused that energy on Christians, on white males in particular, anyone with conservative leanings. And so they internally now, they have a very biased way of viewing the world. And so because they have that biased way of viewing the world, when they see outliers from that, like all of this, and pretty much everything else that we've seen that's been very violent. I mean, the mass shootings that have been conducted by transgenders. I mean, this is all stuff that, anybody with two brain cells saw it coming, but they couldn't see it because it doesn't fit into the narrative that's politically accepted inside of their organizations. So now that they have these things going on, you have a segment of government that's going to turn a blind eye to it. And I'm not willing to say that they're stoking the flames of any of this. I think that I think people can come to their own conclusion on that. But there's certainly a complicit element to it if they're not actively trying to prevent it. And with the militant left, we've absolutely seen that. I think that going into 2025, we're going to see a heck of a lot more of this. There is no shortage of unhinged people out there who see Donald Trump as literally he's literally worse than Hitler, to use their own terminology, right? They don't see conservatives as being their fellow countrymen. See, this is one of the things that conservatives over the years have said, well, I disagree with policy concerns that the liberals have, but they're still Americans, right? That's something that's said over and over and over again. But a lot of people need to come to terms with they don't view you as being their countrymen anymore. They don't view the world that way. And they view this as they have to rise up, because if they don't, you got to understand that everything that is not communist to a communist is fascist. And in America, this is a particular breeding ground for that type of conversation, because all of us are aware of the evils of fascism. We're all aware of it. We came up in the education system that explained all this very vibrantly, but we don't understand that when dyed-in-the-wool communists are saying fascism, a lot of your passerbys in America are going to say, well, yeah, of course I'm against the fascists. But they don't understand what the communists are actually saying, the language control that's being used there. And that's what we're seeing. So not only that, but, this guy that unfortunately has passed on in the Las Vegas incident, his ex-wife is very significant in this. We know that she's pretty strong, liberal, if not a militant leftist. He held a lot of those views as well, from at least from what I've seen. And there's a very strong chance that he's been working with other people out there who may or may not be on that grid, who might have military backgrounds, who might not. We know that he was recruiting people from, the SOCOM community to go to Ukraine, but he was probably recruiting people outside of that as well. We know that he used a couple of different aliases. He used one last name of Berg. None of these things are necessarily out of the ordinary, I would say, but it is significant because it's a wake-up call to Americans. If this guy was doing it, there's probably a lot more people that are as well. And there's, I hate to say this because I think that Ukraine is a very important battlefield globally, right? It's a very important place. It's a testing ground for a lot of developments that are coming out, the small unit level as well as large scale combat operations. And obviously, something's got to be done to curtail both the rise of the Russians and the Chinese. I think that personally, Ukraine should have been the last battlefield and not the first one. I think that we kind of jumped the gun on that. But regardless, that's my opinion on things. But a lot of the people online, the NAFO, right, the North American Fellows Organization, right, this crowd that flies the Ukraine flags online, there's a 1-to-1 correlation between them and the hardcore left, right? 1-to-1 correlation between them. And we know that they have a strong presence in the intelligence community as well. So when we take all that into account, this is the groupthink inside of the larger structure that is now telling us what they think, right? They're projecting that outward. It's an unofficial way to say, this is how we view the world. And so when you begin to piece all that together, that's painting a very dangerous picture for America in the future. And when people who are close to Donald Trump are saying, hey, we need to rein in a lot of this spending, maybe this is an ineffective strategy, and then you have, of course, the narrative that they're spinning yet again, that they spun the first time around. Oh, Donald Trump's a Russian asset. All this stuff is ridiculous on its face. There was no proof of any of this, and yet they still believe it. And they're going to continue to believe it because that's what their groupthink has taught them to believe. It literally violates an internal dogma to argue against that. I mean, I remember I had a guy in class several years ago. This would have been 2017, 2018 time frame. Brilliant guy, retired officer, and a wonderful man. Had a lot of respect for him. He was a naval officer. I don't want to get too detailed about him. Great guy. But when it came to Donald Trump, that was the hill he was going to die on. And this is a guy who was otherwise very conservative. He's somebody that I would say is like a George Bush Republican type, traditional kind of conservative, definitely, Ronald Reagan type. But, when it came to any conversation about Donald Trump, and I keep my mouth shut with clients, but other people that he was training with, that conversation came up and he just would not let it go. Donald Trump's a Russian agent and he's terrible and he's this and he's that and he's compromised. And it was all the narratives, all of the narratives that were being spun. And so when we begin to put all that together, it's very unfortunate. When we begin to put all that together, that's painting an ugly picture for what 2025 after the inauguration is going to look like. Now, a lot of people are attributing, let's say, a Robert Ludlum style, Jason Bourne kind of government conspiracy, fingers in everything. Right. Folks, I'm telling you, don't give them too much credit. Okay. I think, all of us in here have worked with the governmental apparatuses at one point in time or another to varying degrees. Don't give them too much credit. I mean, there's a reason that good enough for government work is a reason that term came around. Doesn't mean that they don't try stuff, and it doesn't mean that they're not successful a time or two, or sometimes often, but don't attribute everything to that.
Yeah, I've got a thought on that too, is maybe these guys were just operating, on their own in a sense of, they're weirdos, like you said, not connected to a bigger plot with, a James Bond type of arch villain stroking a cat. But these guys just wanted to go off on their own, and they're weirdos, hoping their lives would be like martyred and they could start some, event. I mean, that's kind of what I've been thinking. I think that's kind of where you're at also. What do you think of that?
Yeah.
Well, let me add this too for you weigh in. And I think you've already kind of spoken about it. It's like if psychological operations didn't work, I mean, obviously we wouldn't do it. And so I think you are absolutely right when there is a very large community that psychologically is prepared and just like the naval officer you talked about. I mean, this guy's been obviously watching too much Rachel Maddow, but the fact of the matter is, people sort of are, I think they have things that they want to believe. And it's not hard to find somebody out there that's gonna give you what you want and is gonna help solidify your position, whether it's real or not. And so I do believe that you are right that there's a very large element within government that even silently applauds events like this that occurred, because it confirms what they already think. See, we knew this was going to happen. The sort of worldview that they already have, and who the villain is and who the good guy is, because they've all been psychologically prepared over decades. Now, it's one thing, you are right that the government is pure buffoonery and so much that they try to achieve, but the things that the government is very good at, I think, is staying with the narrative over decades and decades and decades. Having a destination that they want to go to in 50 years from now, and continuing to do all the little programs along the way that sort of help get a populace to a certain area. And
right.
And I'll leave that at, and I'll leave for your listen to what you have to say for that.
Yeah, 100%. I would say, I would put it like this: the devil's greatest trick was making you think he didn't exist. Government's greatest trick is to make you believe it's effective. Right. If you think about it, everything that our government does, and speaking to your point, everything that our government does is designed to bribe. Essentially, it's carrot and the stick. It's, hey, let's be friends, and let's, we'll pay you, we'll incentivize you basically to think a particular way, and it appeals to low information people who are incapable of taking that step out on their own. But that being said, a lot of people, again, they ascribe conspiracy to things that I think are far more insidious. When we look at the stuff at the macro level, I mean, the Air Force guy who lit himself on fire. I think everybody's kind of forgot about him already. But he lit himself on fire, Air Force kid. and lit himself on fire for, free Gaza or whatever. Well, what if this guy who set himself off in front of the Trump Hotel in a Cybertruck, what if he did the same thing? What if that's what that was? Now, the report about a bullet hole in his, a gunshot wound to his head, that doesn't necessarily fit with the narrative, maybe. I don't think that we're ever going to get a straight answer. I mean, Las Vegas, obviously, Stephen Paddock in Las Vegas and Las Vegas shooting, never got an answer out of that one, right, and never will.
That's true.
But that being said, this guy, I think on some level or another, whether it was him acting alone, whether it was a cell at work and he was just patsy for it, whatever it is, he got involved in it somehow. And what's more insidious is that this is an overarching groupthink, as I was saying, that is very common on the left. And now they have the casus belli to act. Now they believe that they're in an existential struggle against Donald Trump, against governmental reform, against reining in a lot of this corruption. What we see as corruption, they see it as perfectly fine. And now they literally have their call to arms out there. That's what I've been urging people to understand. No matter where, you could think that, my tinfoil hat's wrapped too tight and, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is that we're seeing, if we were putting all of this out on a scatter plot, these incidents, just like we would do overseas, you'd have the intel analysts that would have a scatter plot out of a map of your operating area. And every time there was a significant activity, they would put a red dot on where it occurred, and it would have the timeline on it. The closer that scatter plot gets to a particular location, that's a hot spot. And this is where more events are going to take place. Well, the closer each of those events get to one another in time and frequency and intensity, that, hey, we're going to have something big kick off. We're getting closer and closer to this. Well, here we are, folks. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're seeing. And when we have people who I consider to have, high stature, right? People who have, high levels of training, a lot of achievement in their career, and now they're doing things like what we saw in Las Vegas. That's a very dangerous situation that I think that we're finding ourselves in, and it doesn't bode well for the future.
Yeah, it just seems like as we go into 2025, and I'm clearly not the smartest guy in this room, probably the dumbest guy in the grid square, but I love to say that, but it seems like this is a replay of 16. We're going to have I would say more of it. That's just my conservative approach. Granted, these are maybe the first salvos of idiots doing their idiocy. But, on the other end of the spectrum is, hey, we've got 10 million illegals in our country, and they're just waiting to hear the chairs against the wall. Yeah, maybe that was the first Jean has a long mustache.
Well, that's what's kind of scary.
Moment.
That's what's kind of, just listening.
There's two ways of looking at this.
No, I think just listening to you guys talk, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, we've got a whole bunch of people we have no idea who they are running around.
Yeah,
you have
absolutely no idea. Yeah,
no idea. Okay, we have a segment of government that is kind of like indifferent, if you will. They're not like too motivated to go after them. Okay, in many respects, our federal government has kind of opened the door and invited them in. I don't think that's a stretch.
100%.
And we also have a large segment of the population, maybe as high as half, that have been sort of psychologically programmed to think that Dr. Evil is getting ready to walk into the White House. And the other thing that's kind of scary is Americans generally think that presidents have way more power than what they probably really do. So, we fret so much about this one guy, like he's going to, change America. And of course, we always know that's not the case. There's three branches of government and they're constantly at odds with each other, vying for power. There's only so much Trump's going to do, even if he was the boogeyman. That's why you can survive bad presidents in this country.
As we have
on many occasions. So even if he turns out to be the boogeyman that half the country thinks he is, how bad could it really be? And the answer is not that bad.
Expect more chops. Yeah, more chops, more Chaz.
But I mean, it's sort of a recipe for bad stuff.
Not only that, but
right? I mean,
ICE. Now look at the static with ICE, right? And then all these other safe space little, idiot governors. They're like, no way. So that's going to be a confrontation we're going to see. Yep. I mean, that was just like a thumbnail sketch.
Yeah.
But that's definitely. Hey, I wanted to pivot also, and we've hit on. I mean, this is fantastic material. I think I could talk about it for 5 hours, but I'm interested to get. NC Scott, your takes on some of the world stage too. I want to tease out some of that stuff. Yeah, we're going into or closing out the third year in Ukraine. So we're beginning a new fighting season coming up in Ukraine. We've had Zelensky. He's vowed that things are going to be different.
Yeah, what's the future there look like?
We've got Putin has. It seems like he started the year without promising any economic differences. And it's just kind of going on with the status quo. What are we looking at like over there? What can we expect?
So, Syria, the loss of Syria.
Yeah, there you go.
Was a major blow to their future foothold, essentially.
Yeah, the port and the airport. Yeah, and having a useful idiot there. Yeah.
Well, having a proxy and having essentially a pipeline that's running into the Mediterranean, that was a massive blow to the Russians. They have not performed, talking at the macro level, they have not performed anywhere near to the expectation that was ascribed to them early on in the invasion and even up until now. Now, talking to, my contacts that have time, in the dirt in Ukraine, the Russians, the professional side of the Russian military have definitely been held back. But that being said, they still have had a presence there and they're still struggling. Now, this isn't to say that Ukraine is definitely going to come out on top of this. They're having a lot of problems as well, and their big problem is manpower. The Russians have a problem with manpower, but not to the degree Ukraine does. Ukraine's losses, I think, are not quite insurmountable yet. But if this thing drags on for another year, they very well may be. Now, the escalations with the Storm Shadow missiles and HIMARS and directed munitions attacks inside of Ukraine. We saw the escalation with the MIRVs being launched. That was a shot across the bow, but then there was no follow-up. And, for all of the bluster that can be prescribed to, Sergei Lavrov and Maria Zakharova and, basically the public faces of the Russian government abroad, for the things that they say, they haven't really been projecting power in the way that they've been suggesting. They say a lot. There's been a lot of saber rattling, and at the strategic level, they haven't really delivered. And I think at this point, we could say, they're waiting on a new administration to come in, and then there's going to be a show of force, or they'll come to the bargaining table. But so far, Trump has made, behind the scenes, Trump has made a lot of motions to try and bring them to the negotiating table to have a negotiated settlement, and they've rejected all of that. each time. And the Ukrainians have been, at least willing to accommodate them, if not agree, obviously not agree to their terms, but willing to accommodate them. And the Russians are having none of it. So I'm not certain where this is going to go. I think that they're struggling with an overall strategy. It is largely a stalemate on the ground, at least from what I've seen. It's been very interesting to watch the developments of drone technology and, in turn, signals intelligence technology. It's something that I can also tell you, and I don't think that this is just propaganda bluster, but there is a rift now developing between, at least to some degree, Chinese industry and the Russian military complex. And what I mean by that is that the Russians have a high degree of sophistication in certain areas, but they're lacking in the industrial capability. They've been relying on the Chinese to develop a lot of their technologies, the drone jamming technology, drone detection technology, signals intelligence collection technologies. And they're finding a lot of this to be wanting. The overall quality of a lot of the equipment that they're getting is lacking. And there's a lot of complaints that's happening now on the Russian side of that. I find this really interesting because the Ukrainians are using the same technologies. And I think that that's pretty ironic, that a lot of the jamming technology and the detection technology in particular is coming literally from the same factories. So that's a fascinating piece. I know it's just one of those strange things. But be that as it may, that is what it is. Where I see all this going, we're going to see in the first 90 days of the Trump administration, they're really going to set the tone with foreign policy. There's a lot that's been made of internal policy and, domestic policy. We're going to see what's being made of foreign policy. The first time around, Trump made a lot out of foreign policy, and it had catastrophic results early on. So I think that they're kind of playing a lot of this close to the chest. But moves need to be made in Venezuela. Venezuela is critically important. If essentially it's like this, if we're able to focus on Venezuela and get rid of Maduro, who is 100% a Russian proxy, if we're able to affect real regime change there and bring that about for the people of Venezuela, that's going to finish the Russian reach in South America. The only country that they're going to have left that is a staunch ally is going to be Nicaragua. And if we're able to go after Nicaragua, that's going to pigeonhole everything that they have going on in Colombia. It's going to fall like dominoes, and it's going to happen quick. I think that we will be able to do that. And out of Venezuela, there's been a lot of moves by the Maduro regime that tell me that they're very afraid of this very thing. We know that the loophole in color revolutions over the past decade or so, because they've all been based on social media and reliant on social media. And what did the Russians do when they were reacting to that? What did Wagner do? You just shut the social media source down. Well, that's the reason that the Soldiers in Flannel Shirts Rebellion failed back in 2017 in Venezuela. Well, now the strategy, at least from what we saw in Syria, is to forego the use of social media altogether. We're just not even going to worry about that. We mobilize, just focus on mobilizing your fighters at the base. It's an adaptation of FOCO warfare, and that's what works. And that worked very, very effectively in Syria. As we saw, Syria, from the time the fighting started to the time Assad's government fell, was just over a week. It was very effective. And I think that that's a model that can be followed in Venezuela to a high degree of success. If anybody in the State Department, in the incoming Trump administration, really wants to put Russia in their place, they're going to do that with Venezuela. And that's going to remove a longtime Russian ally that's been in place since 2004. that is, by the way, the second most oil-rich nation in the world.
That's true.
Hey, you talked about Syria. What can we expect from Syria's new masters?
Well, first, I think the most important question is, who are their masters?
Yeah,
Because,
I mean, they have AQI backing. I mean, the background.
right. We had HTS, which is the Al Qaeda proxy, as you pointed out. The leader of HTS had a $10 million bounty on his head by the State Department up until not a month ago. So where does this go? As soon as the Assad government fell and his organization came into power, you saw both the U.S. and the Israelis carry out strikes on all of the former Assad military bases. That was a mop-up operation to pigeonhole this guy, to make sure that hey, you aren't going to gain the power you think that you're going to gain, and you certainly aren't going to have the military equipment and that force projection capability. I do look for the tap dancing between the Kurds, the Turkish government, and this HTS government to continue. There's going to be small skirmishes. I would say between the PKK and Turkey, there's probably going to be some large skirmishes going on back and forth. But overall, I don't see anything changing in a substantial way, at least in the next 12 months. I don't see, the Ba'athist Party, they're finished. They're not going to come back to power. That's over and done with. HTS is, they have their center of power in Damascus, but I don't think that they're going to be able to extend that control much further than that. The Kurds in Rojava, in the Kurdish Autonomous Zone, they're going to maintain their autonomy, and it's going to continue the same that it has been. There's not going to be a tectonic shift in the power dynamics there.
Yeah, I think it's a prescient view of what we can expect. Certainly, it's a mess, and it's a vacuum. In these times of vacuums of power, people run into there, they rush in there. So I think, I think the new owners, I do think they have some Al Qaeda backing. I'm not sure that we can sanctify. That we can wash that backing away, but I do I think what you're saying. I see a Syria remaining a problem for years and years to come, and but nothing catastrophic for the next year. Yeah.
Now I got another question, and it has to do with hyperinflation. So I think a lot of people think that Trump's going to come in and all of a sudden, utopia is going to arrive and prices are going to go down, and there's sea levels are going to lower and everything else. But we've gotten to. I read a pretty good article. Nick Giambruno, who's been on this podcast, he's talking about the fact that because we've run up such a high national debt, that the tool that we usually use, which is raising rates to take care of inflation, is not even an option anymore. And that the only fix for out of control debt, which is pretty much where we're headed, is hyperinflation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not an economist, but the bills got to get paid at some point. The one thing that I would offer to counter that, it's obviously the music's going to stop at some point. However, we are still the world's reserve currency. And what that means is that the U.S. dollar is what oil is traded in. And so with BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa economic alliance, what BRICS has sought to do is replace the dollar's hegemony. I think that BRICS is a very real threat, but there are means to contain that. And basically, preventing their ability to control the flow of oil is really where BRICS is. That's the power that they seek. So going back to the strategy with Venezuela, going back to the strategy with Syria, obviously that was a primary element of that at work in Ukraine as well. I don't necessarily see it in 2025. I don't see hyperinflation occurring. I do see it occurring certainly at some point. But that's only when the U.S. dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency. I do think that with Donald Trump coming into office, it for the most part, I think his policies are going to be a mirror of the 2016, the first term of Trump, and specifically the first 2 years. We actually saw a negative, for a very short amount of time, we saw a negative price of oil, meaning that basically the oil reserves were such that they had to give a certain segment of it away. And so, our gas prices went down. Now, short term, when your gas prices go down, so average price of gas somewhere, north of $3. I've got diesel vehicles, so it's closer to $4, and it's been hovering around that. If that falls too quick, that actually causes deflation, and that's just as bad as inflation. But we would recover from that very quickly, and we have. This has happened many times. Over the past 20 years, gas prices have fallen substantially and overnight. That would be a very good thing. We would recover from that pretty quick, because people are going to, at the end of the day, they're going to have more money in their pocket to spend. And so that's going to be better for our economy long term. So I think that, like, the prospects of hyperinflation, I don't think that's going to be an issue in 2025. I just don't see it. I could be completely wrong about that, and I don't want to be talking out of my fourth point of contact, because again, that really isn't my wheelhouse. But what I will say is that if Venezuela is no longer in play for the Russians, and they begin to, they're losing all basically everything that they planned on backing their currencies with. I just don't see it. I don't see it. So I think that economically, we've got some bright times in our future. I think that's going to be good. I strongly believe that the threat matrix in 2025 and going forward is the militant left and sympathizers in our own government struggling for power. And that's where the fight's going to be. And that's going to be an internal thing. I think that as Venezuela heats up, we have, Tren de Aragua here, which is their form of gray zone warfare. That's their organized crime. They're going to get very active, and we're going to see an insurgency here in the United States. Those deeply concern me. But as far as our economy goes, I think that we're on shaky ground, but we're going to come out of it. I think that we're going to come out of it stronger.
Well, that's good news, and because I know people are looking for some economic relief. Matt, appreciate you coming on. It's always great having you.
Fantastic, sir.
And
Thank you. It's an honor.
I'm always smarter after
Absolutely.
one of these episodes. So we're definitely going to stay in touch, and we'll see what happens. And I think you're dead on a lot of especially the foreign direction and foreign affairs stuff. So appreciate your insights. I think obviously our listeners always appreciate it. And until next time, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Pinelander podcast. If you enjoy our unique content, please consider supporting our sponsors. Soft News provides special operations news from around the world. It's where Paul and I go to keep abreast of what's going on within the SOF community. Check them out at sof.news. American Partisan. It's the vanguard movement of Western civilization. Be sure to check them out at americanpartisan.org. And, of course, Blacksmith Publishing. We've been serving the Warrior class since 2013. They have a great titles written for warriors, by warriors. If you're looking for excellent reference material or just want to enjoy a great novel, be sure to check out the bookstore. Or if you enjoy hanging out with warriors, come spend some time with us in the G-Base over at the Pinelander podcast. All that's at blacksmithpublishing.com. Until our next meeting, stay mentally and tactically smart, physically and spiritually strong, and socially astute. To each other we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. May God continue to bless Pineland.